there's no question that the Department of Defense has needs, and there's also no question that we as a country face threats. I think the chairman did a decent job of outlining those threats. Basically, you've got China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and various terrorist groups that have all sort of agreed on one thing. They want the U.S. to be weaker. And that is a problem for our country. I think it's also a problem for the world, and we need to figure out how to meet those threats. But there are two huge problems with this bill. First of all, it is part of the larger reconciliation bill. It's part of the Republican budget for the next 10 years. And one of the biggest things to remember about this budget is it increases the debt and the deficit. And this is part of that overall effort. And I say that because you will hear a lot of Republicans talking about how problematic the debt and the deficit are. And they've actually given some pretty good speeches talking about the challenges that that's going to face for our country and for future generations. And then they're all going to go out there and vote for a budget to increase the debt. I want you to all think about that as you hear these speeches and these passionate appeals to our sense of fiscal responsibility, all to vote for a budget to increase the debt. And as someone said to me this weekend was actually talking about Democrats and how we support programs and how important those programs are, but we don't support them enough to ask the American people to be willing to pay for them. Well, it's exactly what the Republicans are doing today. If, in fact, getting that defense budget to 4% or whatever number is that important, then you should be willing to ask the American people to pay for it. Instead, this budget cuts taxes by anywhere between $4.5 trillion and $9 trillion, depending on how they choose to do the math at the end of this, drives up our debt. We're once again saying to the American people, this is important, but not important enough to actually pay for it. So the budget itself is a huge problem, and you really can't support the additional $150 billion for defense if you don't support the overall reconciliation bill, because that's what this is. And the overall reconciliation bill, I firmly believe, is a disaster for this country, because the one thing it does do is it cuts a variety of different programs that are important for working people in this country, Medicaid being the chief amongst them, but also NIH, CDC, a whole bunch of things that are really crucial to the guts of this country are going to be cut, and again, all to drive up the debt and deficit to pay for tax cuts for people who don't really need them. So the budget itself is a huge problem. But the second big problem here is we're giving $150 billion to this Pentagon, to Secretary Hegseth and President Trump. They have not even begun to prove that there is a chance in hell that they will spend this money intelligently, efficiently, and effectively. Secretary Hegseth has proven himself to be completely incapable of doing the job of Secretary of Defense. Now, clearly, we can start with the Signalgate thing that everybody knows about, that basically he shared on a commercial chat application, which included a reporter, intimate details, sensitive details of an attack plan prior to it being carried out. Now, that's pretty bad. We have a lot of new members of this committee, and I'm sure the new members of this committee remember that the first week they were on this committee, they were taught about sensitive classified information and how not to share it, something that the Secretary of Defense doesn't even understand. Now, that's bad. But worse is the reaction to it was, what? That's not a problem. So they're just going to keep doing it, and they have kept doing it. A number of other chats have been exposed. The Secretary's personal cell phone number on which he engages in these chats is accessible to anybody on the planet, and they're not going to do anything about it. That level of incompetence doesn't make anyone feel better about their ability to spend $20, much less $150 billion. And then, what are we, 3 months, 2.5 months into his job? He's already got 5 former employees who have left who have talked about the chaos going on inside of the Pentagon. You know, months in hell, I think, was one of the description. A Secretary of Defense who was focused on his image and stopping leakers instead of doing his job. And pause and appreciate the irony. He wants to stop leakers, then he ought to go ahead and just look in the mirror, all right? Because he's the one who leaked all of this information. So the Pentagon is being very poorly run. I see no evidence that they're going to try to get any better. And what are they focused on? They're focused on a culture war. They are banning hundreds of books and banning words. You know, I cited this example earlier, but briefly the Enola Gay was scrubbed from all the Department of Defense websites because they wanted to get rid of the word gay throughout the Pentagon. Because, you know, nothing screams national security more than making sure nobody says gay anywhere within the Department of Defense. And that's but the tip of the iceberg. They banned a book on Jackie Robinson. They've gone through all of this effort that's got nothing to do with making the Pentagon more efficient and more effective, more lethal, meeting our defense needs. It is all a distraction from actually running the place in any sort of efficient and effective way. And the Secretary dismisses this as, oh, these are just disgruntled former employees. These are people he hired, and not 2 years ago, 4 weeks ago. If you get that many disgruntled employees that quick, maybe you need to pause for a moment and think about your management style, because it isn't working out particularly well for anybody. What they're not doing is they're not focusing on ways to make the Pentagon more efficient and more effective, like this committee is. And I want to compliment the chairman. We got really strong bipartisan plans to go after the regulations, the requirements, all of the things that make acquisition and procurement so problematic. This committee's going to work on that. The Pentagon's going to work on making sure that nobody says the word gay. All right, that's not particularly helpful. And then what is the overlying strategy behind all of this? There is no strategy. We don't even have the FY26 budget yet. As of last night, they hadn't even given us the execution instructions for the rest of the FY25 budget. So we don't know what they plan to do, and we're going to throw another $150 billion at them and hope that they figure it out. And then the other big problem with the strategy, of course, is in a world where we face those adversaries, that I think the chairman did a very good job of describing, we have decided that we're going to go it alone. We're going to put tariffs on everybody. Sorry, everybody but Russia. I should make that clear. So we're going to alienate everybody. We're going to attack our alliances. We're going to threaten to invade Greenland, going after Denmark. We're going to threaten to annex Canada. We're going to threaten to invade Panama. We're going to act like we have the right to take over the Gaza Strip. And then we're going to stand up to the rest of the world and say, follow us because we're the leaders of the free world. That is the strategy that we are being asked to throw $150 billion into. I don't think we should. I think we should make the Pentagon more efficient, more effective, and then we can lay out an actual strategy. But this budget is terrible. The Pentagon has no intention of being efficient and effective, and therefore I cannot support throwing another $150 billion that I absolutely guarantee you will not be well spent. I yield back. I thank the chairman.